Good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Chris. I am indeed a reformed project manager, and I work now as a systems thinking consultant in the private sector. And I've been engaged as a project manager and a consultant in organisational performance improvement for a number of years. But when I'm not working, I'm father to 2 children. And like many parents, one of the activities I've enjoyed engaging with my children has been reading to and reading with and reading to them. Early on in my career as a parent, I became acquainted with the work of Theodore Geisel, an author who went by the pen name of Dr. Seuss. And of all the Dr. Seuss books we read together, my personal favourite was a book called The Lorax. It's a cautionary tale that describes what happens in a forest full of these wonderful things called truffula trees, and the effects on the truffula trees as the fruits of the trees are exploited by a character called the Onceler. The parallel and the analogy is obvious as humankind, how we exploit our natural resources and the effect that it has on our environment. And the parallel is as valid today as it was in 1971 when the book was first written. But I believe that there's a second parallel in the book, and that parallel concerns a relationship between the activities and decisions made by the Onceler in the Lorax and the activities and the decisions that we make as leaders in organisations when we seek to bring about improvement in performance. And that's what I'd like to talk to you about today. So let's talk about organisational performance. It's a problem we've been working on since the Industrial Revolution. And of course there are a number of ways that you can measure performance. It could be financial, efficiency, quality of service, and so on. And in recent decades, organisational performance has become an industry in its own right. We hire global management consulting firms to advise us on best practice, tools, processes, and operating models. Yet when we put these methods to use inside of organisations, they seem to bear such small fruit. Our public sector organisations continue to creak under the weight of demand. Private sector organisations the world over oscillate between localised and centralised operating models, between insourcing and outsourcing. And when our efforts to improve performance fail to yield the results expected, the default response is a restructure. So how are we getting this so wrong? How are we finding ourselves stuck in this cycle of performance improvement that fails to advance performance? Well, I have a theory, and my theory is this. The reason this is happening is we're thinking about organisations in the wrong way. And for as long as we continue to think about organisations in this way, we will continue to repeat the mistakes that the Onceler made in the Lorax. But why is this? Well, let's take a step back and think about the reality of the world that surrounds us. Wherever we look, we see examples of almost unimaginable complexity that we simply take for granted. Things like the human body, but also forests and trees. But even things as seemingly simple and small as a leaf or a snowflake, when studied, exhibit enormously complex behaviours and structures. And since the dawn of humankind, we've sought out ways to explain these everyday miracles. We began with religion and philosophy, and then in the 1600s came the Enlightenment, the Age of Reason. A belief that humankind can be improved through rational change. With the Enlightenment came the philosophy of reductionism, and with reductionism came the method of analysis. Now, analysis is a word that we use every day, but what does it actually mean? Well, analysis is quite simple. Analysis says that in order to understand something complex, first you must break it down into its constituent parts. You form an understanding of those constituent parts taken separately, and then you reassemble your understanding of those constituent parts into an understanding of the whole. I thought it sounded simple. But now let's think about how that way of thinking about society and thinking about our world has structured human knowledge. We have the sciences that are segregated into physics, chemistry, and biology. We have healthcare that is provided to us in the forms of the specialisms of medical science, neurological, cardiovascular, and musculoskeletal. And our schools and universities teach our students in subjects like maths and history and the arts. And now let's think about what happens when we apply this analytical form of thinking to inform how we build and design organisations. Some unspoken truths that we simply don't challenge and we accept as normal. We have the division of labour, where organisations segregate themselves according to functional specialisms like HR, finance, marketing, legal, and so on. We have Taylorism, or scientific management, where we segregate our workforces between workers and managers. And we have large organisations the world over that segregate their operations between front offices that receive customer demands and back offices that service those demands. So it's true and it's clear that our modern organisations and this analytical way of thinking are closely related. And it's also true that we appear to be on this cycle of performance improvement efforts that fail to advance performance. And so if both those things are true, perhaps the mode of analysis is not the best way of approaching our organisations. So what might be a better way? Well, to answer that question, let's go back to those everyday things that surround us. The human body, forests and trees, but also human-made objects, like the motor vehicle, aeroplanes, and organisations. Are all of these things collections of standalone, independent parts that you can study separately? Well, I don't think that they are. I think what they are systems. But what's a system? Well, loosely put, a system can be defined as something that has three distinct properties, only three. Number one, it has a purpose or a function. Number two, it comprises two or more parts. And number three, that function or purpose is only met when those parts interact. Now, when you study the world through a systems lens, different truths begin to emerge. These are truths that our intuitions know exist already, but that the method of analysis gives us no way of articulating. Truths such as, in a system, the interactions between the parts are at least as significant as the parts themselves. Truths such as, when dealing with problem solving, A causes B. But A is seldom the root cause. It's normally a symptom of another problem somewhere else. And we find that problems are not linear, but they're circular. And there are things about systems that can't be answered even by studying the system itself. Take, for example, a motor vehicle manufactured for the British marketplace, where we have the steering wheel on the right. Using the method of analysis, if you take that motor vehicle to pieces and try to answer the question as to why the steering wheel is on the right, you'll find that the location of the steering wheel is entirely arbitrary. It's only by studying the motor vehicle in the context of its wider system that the obvious truth will be learned that we drive on the left, but the steering wheel is on the right. So, if this is the case, perhaps there's some mileage in thinking about our organisations as systems. And what might that look like? Systems, remember, are something that have a purpose. They comprise two or more parts, and it's only when those parts interact that the purpose is met. How might our healthcare systems look if they were designed against a purpose of creating and maintaining health, rather than conforming to a financial plan? How might our education systems look if they were designed against a purpose of educating our children, rather than satisfying a government inspector? And how much more effective and sustainable might our organisational improvement efforts be if they were undertaken with an appreciation that organisations are complex systems? But then why does all this matter? Well, let's go back to the Lorax. Aside from being a really entertaining children's book, if it's nothing else, the Lorax is a tale of a complex, interconnected system. And it's my belief that our boundless energies are driven by a deeply rooted desire to make our world a better place. But the legacy of the age of reason has taught us to forego our intuitions and base our decisions on rational, logical arguments. Arguments that are formed by focusing on the parts of systems at the expense of their interactions. Arguments that are therefore incomplete or possibly plain wrong. Therefore, if we want to move off this conveyor belt of failed organisational change, we need to bring the science of systems thinking to the forefront of our societies. Now, let me be clear what I mean. I'm not saying that we should forego logic and empiricism in favour of intuition alone. But I am saying that a systems view of the world requires us to ask different, more meaningful questions of the world that surrounds us. It requires us to join dots that our intuitions know exist, but that analysis gives us no method to articulate. I'm saying we need to educate our children to think and speak in systems, not just subjects. And that as leaders and custodians of the future, we need to let go of the prevailing dogma of analysis and find another way of thinking that will help us to solve the complex, interconnected problems our world faces. But here's the good news. If you agree with this vision, and you would like a masterclass in it, you don't need to hire a consultant. Just read the Lorax. Thank you.